All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're calling from or joining us from. Thank you for joining us today in Upstream's webinar, Gen AI and Procurement, How Process Orchestration is the Winner. We're very excited to kickstart this webinar today, and we're joined by Dr. Elouise Epstein of Kearney and our co-founder and CTO, Marco Coental. So I will leave the floor to them, our experts for today. In the meantime, if you have any questions throughout the program, please feel free to add that to our Q&A box, and we will get to them throughout the webinar. So enjoy.
Apparently it's important to unmute yourself. Okay, so let's kick it off. I'm really excited about this for this conversation. This has been a topic that's been really close to my heart for a long time. I have multiple patents in the realm of AI and algorithms and how to make them accessible and have recommendations accessible to people. And I'm really excited to tackle this subject with you, Elouise. Good morning.
Morning, or I guess good afternoon where you are, but it's definitely morning here.
Yes, it's definitely good because the workers that were fixing something across the street took a lunch break. So hopefully there won't be too much drilling background noises throughout this one. So let me just set the stage a little bit. I mean, if you spend time on LinkedIn or anywhere online in the past few months, it seems like Gen AI is everywhere. And it's going to come for all of our jobs. But for those of you on the line who've tried using it, it has its own challenges. There is definitely value in it, but it's not a cure-all or a solution to solve all of our pains, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately. So I'll kind of start with Elouise's view on that. I know that you added it to your, you added ChatGPT or generative AI, Bard, and so on to your spider map recently. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, why you finally did that, and what makes that different.
Yeah, I would like to note for the record that I added those under duress and not of my own volition. It was just a reflection of, I'm kidding, of course. We have come to that point where those capabilities are required us to look at that. And I can't tell you how many calls I have clients say, we want to be a Gen AI procurement organization. We need to get Gen AI in now. And, you know, the skeptic and the cynical part of me is like, well, we haven't even finished developing Gen AI. How are we going to even apply it to procurement? However, I do think that it is one of those breakthroughs that will power. So I don't think we're going to buy individually generative AI as organizations, maybe in our personal lives. But I think it's going to be very important in the two areas that are nearest and dearest to my heart, which is process orchestration and intelligence creation. I think in those two areas, and I'm sure we'll dive deeper into those, but into those two areas are going to be the big winners. And those two sit in the middle of my spider diagram. So that's really why I added it.
Amazing. And I find it so inspiring because I've always thought of AI and Gen AI as another iteration of it, as sort of an engine, right? It's a black box, and just like an engine, it won't get you anywhere without a vehicle wrapped around it. Now, that vehicle could be a scooter or a plane or a boat, but you won't get anywhere unless you wrap it with something that will help you achieve it. So it definitely resonates a lot with me and what I've been seeing. And if we also look at other spaces, another industry, and how AI was adopted there, it's never as this standalone black box that people use, but it is wrapped up in processes, especially if we look at really the revenue tools as an example, which to me is the closest analogy to spend tools, and the differences between them just highlight how underinvested the spend side of the businesses, both in processes and AI. So, and if we look to learn lessons from there, it really leverages AI as part of the process, right? Which is a slightly different process, but from the same context. So I really appreciate your point of view on that.
And I wanted to add,
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember when big data was a thing and everybody was running around losing their mind saying we want to be a big data organization or a data-driven organization, which are good goals to have, but we don't just go buy big data. As we learned, or we don't hire data scientists, we learned that we have to embed those capabilities into our core applications, whether it's spend analysis or sourcing or procure to pay or whatever. And what my takeaway long ago, because I made the mistake, I'm running around talking about big data like the idiot that I was. But the reality is that it wasn't until we started talking about like how it applied to running P2P or rec to pay. And so for the last 6 or 7 years, we have started to see AI, or at least machine learning, make its way into a lot of the products. And most of it was not really true AI as we've imagined it. And I think now we are starting to see Gen AI be that next evolution. But Gen AI is not the destination either, by the way. It's just a way station to what comes next.
So 100%, I agree on all of those. First, I mean, my first research paper was on a subject called small data, as part of the big data revolution. And it came from the concept that you can do a lot with big data, but there's a lot of things that you can do. And the concept of small data was just data that is just personal to me. What can I just learn from my data that doesn't compare it to everyone else in the world? And very similarly in our space, what can we learn about our business? Not necessarily by looking at all the data in the world, but just looking internally at our business. And in that way, it's still a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. But that really leads me to the next thing, because AI and generative AI, and I think the future is actually looking at these two as a part of the same thing. It's not generative versus machine learning, right? It's how do you combine the two together? Generative AI has its advantages. It communicates in human language. It's much easier to understand than a machine learning vector that just spits out a vector for you and hey, go figure that one out, right? So it's much easier to communicate and understand both input and output, but it's significantly less factual, right? If you give it a number equation that a calculator could do, it won't necessarily give you the right answer. So it's about taking the strengths of all of the technologies, data combined, and how do we learn to merge data strategy with Gen AI, with, I call it factual AI. I haven't found a better term yet in the industry, so I invented that one. But how do we marry all of these things together in a way that actually adds value to the business, right? But before we talk about the value, there's a lot of it. Let's talk a little bit about the risks. Because when you're talking about making decisions based on outputs from such systems, there are a lot of risks associated with that. And when you think about Gen AI and adopting those, what are kind of the risks that we should be aware of as we adopt such technologies?
Well, first and foremost, Gen AI is, I mean, like all algorithms are more or less the same. And they're inert. They don't do anything until you feed them with data. So data, and you just mentioned this, is the core to this. And every organization I talk to, or like 99% of them, have bad supplier data, which creates a whole cascade of problems. But if we're going to do all this AI, we better understand what's the data that's feeding it, because biased data, as all the studies are showing us, that all the, like, what is, you look at what Gen AI has been trained on, it's a certain subset of literature, a certain subset of film, appealing to a certain aesthetic, which is neither good nor bad. It's just, it's incomplete. And a lot of other data that would feed into those models either doesn't exist, is not accessible, hasn't been converted to digital. So it's hard to just say that Gen AI can do anything or everything when it doesn't have all the data to train itself. So I think that's probably the biggest risk, is that we assume that it's the be all end all when it's very heavily biased and skewed towards whatever data was fed to it. And so we have to really understand that. And I like to talk about, in my new book, I talk about developing algorithmic literacy. And all of us need to understand how the algorithms in our life are manipulating us, but they're manipulating us by the data they collect on us. So they're using our data either for or against us. That's your you get to interpret that. But the reality
right?
is, yeah, or both, yeah, it can be both. But we're constantly, if I do a search, or I'm talking about, increasingly, I'm talking about topics, and then they make their way into the ads that I see. We have to understand that, and that to me is the biggest risk, is or maybe I'll summarize by saying our lack of understanding of how the data plays into that. That's the biggest risk.
I agree so much. And I'll add two things to it. One is when you're asking about topics that are relatively static, that don't change, like you're planning a trip to Acadia National Park. Not that I've done that recently. But if you're planning a trip to Acadia National Park, that hasn't really changed in many, many years. So the data that these algorithms were trained on, fairly accurate, fairly reliable. Maybe I'll miss on some hotel recommendations, but not too much. But on the other hand, in the space of suppliers and business, things change all the time. And algorithms like that are based on, the number of times a certain supplier appears somewhere in a certain context, then it automatically skews heavily to traditional, bigger suppliers. And I think in many ways, if we base things on that, we inherently will step away from innovation, right? It doesn't expose the new, latest and greatest capabilities for the strength of those capabilities, because it will always prioritize things that have appeared more in the past, right? It is based in the past, so we can't.
Yeah, I would just add, on your trip to Acadia, you probably used a mapping program to get there. So your route to the national park would be influenced and changed. And even what you might, and that might direct where you go, or what you even see on the map, which in days past or years past, you'd get a paper map and it would all look equal. But you could probably, if you look at a Google map, it's going to concentrate and say, this is a place of interest, and it's going to direct you. So I do think like the data in and around that metadata of how we interact with even national parks has changed. And by the way, in your planning, you might choose to avoid Acadia at a certain time of year because of X or Y factor.
100%. And that's exactly that combination, right? We take I need to find a better term for this, but the factual traditional AI, and we merge it with this new generative capabilities to build a trip plan, right? And navigate. And I love the navigation example, because to me, there's one thing in navigation that we did really well. It communicates the outcomes of certain decisions to you as an end user in a very easy to understand way. If you're, on Google Maps, you're navigating somewhere and suddenly there's a better route for you, then it will always show. It's like, hey, this will be 4 minutes faster and $2 more from a tolls perspective. And then you can make the decision. But it always gives you the outcome in a way that is easy for you to understand. It's not just, hey, this is the route I gave you because I think this is the best thing and you trust me, or don't use me, right? It
Right.
communicates it in a
Well,
way that
and it
makes it
gives,
accessible.
yeah, it gives you more information. And if I take the paper map, all routes look equal. All roads look, because they're just lines on a map. And maybe I'll talk to a local and they'll say, oh, never take this road during the winter or whatever. But now, like you said, like it's up to date, overlaid, and that's pretty powerful because it's instantaneous, more or less instantaneous.
Yes, and I think of it as very similar to suppliers, because just like there are multiple routes to get from point A to point B, there are multiple suppliers that can deliver, value capabilities in a certain space. But it's about understanding your business goals, right? What you already have. There are personalization in the non-personal but organizational aspect of it that are just as relevant, if not more relevant, than any data that is publicly available that these algorithms have been trained on, right? Maybe it's our ESG goals. Maybe it's, minority-owned businesses that we're trying to prioritize. Maybe it's our preferred vendor. Maybe we have discounts. Maybe our reseller supports one vendor versus the other. There's so many things that go into these decisions that are specific to the organization. And also, there isn't a one size fits all necessarily, because businesses are different. And at the end of the day, they don't know who you are when you're making these prompts. So it's about both the context that is lacking, the personalization, right? And the factual aspects of it. I think the modernization, to me, that add the biggest risk together.
Yes.
But even with all those risks in mind, there's still a lot of value there. So let's talk a little bit about, what we can achieve with it. You talk to everyone in the industry. What are kind of the most interesting use cases or the most valuable ones that you see? You alluded to it a little bit in the beginning, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
So without a doubt, to me, and this gets to what you were just talking about, process orchestration is to me, it's the pinnacle of what we've been aspiring to in procurement. Now, my definition of, or I should say, Gen AI enabled process orchestration, because, and this is not a dig at anybody, including yourself, just giving me workflows and allowing me to design workflows, that's a huge technological leap over what we've had. So I applaud that, but I don't even want to do that anymore. I want to get to the point where I set the start point, the end point, and the guardrails, and let the system figure it out. And I'll shortcut here, the Gen AI figure it out, and get the user where they want to go, to use whatever supplier we have, to employ diverse suppliers or green suppliers or whatever the business objective is. We should be able to layer that into the logic and then let the user go. And I don't want to have to program that workflow. And much like I talked about how Google Maps would manipulate the journey to the national park and the journey through it, it's a perfect analogy for this. The equivalent of today's legacy systems is handing you the paper map and saying,
Yes.
good luck. And then we wonder why people get lost, why people get jammed up, why people just leave the park. They don't even go. Or they pay the fee and then they just turn around because it's just a disaster. Yes. And so I really want to get to a point where I don't have to, as the designer, I don't want to have to go stand out there and tell you where to go. I just want you to have that Google Map view. And I think that's coming. So I think when I talk about Gen AI process orchestration, that's what I mean. And I think that's the use case that sells the best, because ultimately it doesn't matter what systems I have today. I could overlay that on the systems and the end user gets a much better experience.
I love that. And I think the next iteration of this will be not even, hey, have it figure out how to take me from point A to point B, but realize that my point B is this amazing viewpoint. But right now it's super crowded and there's a different better viewpoint in this time of day or something. And it actually tells you, hey, instead of going here, you should actually go there. And I think that's the next, if we kind of rip on this analogy of maps, then I think that is the next iteration. It's not expecting you to even know where you want to go, like what is that destination, but helping you get there by understanding your goals. I love viewpoints. That's me. I love to sit and see amazing viewpoints. I would hike for hours to achieve that. That's what I want. So understanding your priorities as an organization, and then helping you figure out what are the points in the process that you need to go. And then it's a living, breathing thing, because if you're a truck or a motorbike or a bike or a regular car, you'll be able to get different places, right? So.
And let me add to that is sometimes I don't even know what I need or want. Sometimes I need the prompting to drive me there and to get me there. And I think that's important because, and that's the power of Amazon or Google or Netflix, is like, I had no idea that I liked this genre, or I had no idea I needed to buy this thing. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, I'm really happy that the algorithm suggested I buy this or consume this or do that. So I think I like your point is I think I'm going to Acadia, but guess what? It's going to route me over, to where there's nobody and it's off the beaten path kind of stuff. But I didn't know that.
Exactly. I love that. And the next thing to me is, if we kind of riff on that and the process orchestration aspect of it, is that at the end of the day, when we think about Gen AI as a separate thing that it requires people to prompt into it, right? Yeah. So it requires someone to take initiative and say, hey, maybe I need help making this decision. Let me ask Gen AI, generic word, right? Let me ask someone. But expecting people to know they don't know, is not necessarily the right thing. And when you bake it in to just the day-to-day processes, the systems and the behaviors, and to, just like when you have a watch and it tells you, hey, like a reminder to just breathe deeply right now because your heart rate is going up, it just streamlines it into your day. Whether if I had to constantly search, should I be breathing deeply right now? I will never be doing that,
Well, that's why I said that Gen AI is just the way station onto our next thing, because I saw a demo yesterday, and I see these demos all the time. It's like showing me all these prompts that for a thing it was a procure tech tool. And it's like after about the third one, I just lost the thread, even though I knew where it was going. I knew what the objective was. It's like, I don't have the patience to sit there and enter all these prompts. Like eventually we have to get to the point, and there, some of the category management solutions that are out there, you just click a button and you get a category strategy. Like that's so we have to get to a little bit more of a bubbling up of the prompts to whatever the thing is. Say, so as a requisitioner, I want a new laptop. Well, like I should be able to just say I need a new laptop, and then it should trigger off the whole thing, or it should intuit that, hey, it's been over 3 years since my laptop's been replaced. I'm due. It should just prompt me, and that's so. And I think that's what we're missing, because that's why I get excited about Gen AI and process orchestration, because right now, I'm not going to, like you said, I love your example of I should have to go enter a prompt. When should I take a break versus, hey, my watch has just told me 6 times I need to like stand or take, or in fact, it just told me to stand up. So
I took it off. I'm tired of ignoring its recommendations for a healthier, more balanced life. But we'll make sure it's harder to do in business. Oh, we got a really interesting question from Sean. Sean is asking, I wonder if the next generation of professionals, procurement and otherwise, will not even tolerate systems and processes that aren't smart AI driven. They will simply reject those solutions that aren't intuitive.
I think we're already seeing that. It's a great question, and we're already seeing it. And we've been on this journey away from, hey, we bought an end-to-end system that was a myth or a fallacy or even outright fraud. Or maybe not fraud, but we've moved to, hey, we're on that journey of a lot of the solutions we've seen emerge over the last 6 years are much better. They're not perfect, but they have innovated tremendously to get us to where we need to go. And now I look at and companies like yours and like this new generation, like the companies that are 1 to 2 years old are like you have an unfair advantage because you were building a brand new tool in the era of Gen AI. It's like the 10 years ago, the startups that built cloud native platforms in an era when we were just moving to the cloud, they had a huge advantage over companies with big installed on-premise install bases. And so
Data centers,
it's just, yeah, exactly. So I'll get to Sean's question in a second, but I think you have that advantage, and I think increasingly, especially in procurement, we were gaslit into believing that A, an system would do it, and B, when that didn't work, we were convinced that we were somehow doing it wrong. When in reality, the technology was just terrible. Just terrible. I can't stress that enough.
I love this. We were gaslit to believing that there's a single end-to-end solution that will stop all the pain and solve all of our problems.
Right, and that just didn't technically exist. And I see bits and pieces. I see intake forms that have 30 questions on them. I can't answer 30 questions. And so to Sean's question, users will increasingly not tolerate it. I like to say in 2016, well, procurement's had 3 moments. The first one was about 2016, where the business started to realize, why is corporate procurement not like Amazon? And I don't think we've effectively solved that. Just to close that out, the other 2 moments were COVID and then right now, which is the Gen AI moment. But I think increasingly that users will not tolerate it, and the younger generation, certainly. I don't want to be generationally deterministic, but I think it just looks stupid, these tools with 20, 30 questions.
I agree. And if I take back go back on the analogy for cloud, this is actually a space where I grew up. This is where a lot of my knowledge exists. And there it was the same, right? We had data center technologies where a single virtualization provider was supposed to solve all of our pains. And suddenly you move to the cloud and there are, I think, over 300 different managed services on AWS today, right? And our app, for example, is built on over 16 different ones, because even within a single cloud provider, right, different services have different advantages for different capabilities. And it just helps us build an application that is so much more scalable, elastic, reliable, secure, things that I would have had to work hours and days and years probably to develop on my own in a data center based application. So it just helps everyone be better, right? Allows me to provide better for my customers as well. And I think the same is coming in procurement, where you will have to pick and choose the different components to build your own end-to-end solution. And that's where orchestration is really important, because we need all of these systems to be able to work together and not rely on us. And then data is a big component, because different pieces of data will be located and stored in different aspects of these applications. So if you want to get good recommendations, good AI, anything on top of these, you need to also combine the data across all of these orchestrated systems. And I think that's where the value is just enhanced from it. Each system will only be able to provide certain data based on the world that it exists in. But then once we orchestrate all of this, we can build a picture that is much stronger than any single solution, basically on its own, will be able to provide.
Well, I would argue Gen AI will do that. You're not even going to have to plumb all of that. And that to me is why I'm pushing, like when I talk about Gen AI process orchestration, that's what I'm referring to, because we have to get to be able to, like, you're never going to, no company is going to stitch all those systems together. But when you look at some of these Gen AI integrations, that's when it's going to really happen.
I
Because
love our
sometimes
next
we don't know
question.
the data that sometimes we don't know the data that we need to, and that's where the system, sorry, just had.
No, I love that. We don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
So the next question from Andrew from the audience is perfect because it leads me to my next question anyway. And Andrew is asking, how do I convince our leadership to adopt an AI solution in our organization? And to add to that, I also want to hear from you what strategies you have seen from other. I know you're so integrated with the space, with the market, that strategies that have been successful for organizations to successfully adopt AI.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to convince your leader, then you probably have a weak leader. And I say that because I see a lot of weak leaders and I encounter a lot of them when it comes to digital. They may be great in other areas, but so you might reconsider which leader you're working for. But I think at this point, and I'm not saying that as flippantly as that came out, but we've had like AI and Gen AI has hit that tipping point. It's in the zeitgeist. Everybody is talking about it. Everybody, now maybe very few understand it, but it's everywhere. So it would be so it would be really like if you have to convince somebody, then they're it's sort of like Sean's question a moment ago about tolerating bad systems. In some ways, the organization's tolerating bad leadership. So how do you remediate that? You can have them follow me on LinkedIn. You can have them read my books. You could gently, and I'll give them a book, right? It's not, but like you got to get them to understand this, just how deficient that viewpoint is, because we're going to not tolerate bad systems. We're not going to organizations are going to vomit out bad leaders pretty quickly, because all of a sudden we are like Gen AI will expose inefficient organizations and inefficient processes, and very quickly we'll realize that what took us 100, 500, 1,000 people will take only 10% of that. And I've been saying that for a number of years, and it's coming and we're starting to see that. And so any leader that's just holding on and is threatened by AI or doesn't understand it is just not going to survive.
I agree. And I think the next evolution from that, and we can learn from a lot of the different digital waves that we've seen, is that it becomes a competitive advantage. It starts as a competitive advantage if you're able to leverage AI, Gen AI, to increase your effectiveness as an organization, right? We saw it on the revenue side. It started by being an advantage to those who leveraged that and incorporated AI into their revenue processes. And then at the end, if you were not doing it, you were left behind. You weren't able to keep up with your competitors. And I think the same will happen here. Leaders that are not going to embrace this change and figure out how to get advantage. Again, if they do it early, it's a competitive advantage. And if they don't, it just becomes a weakness and a drag on the business. And either the leader won't survive or the business won't.
Right. And so another thing, leaders can go to DPW, Digital Procurement World, which I know both you and I will be there. There's going to be 50 CPOs there, which is up from 20 last year. I think those are the numbers, I more or less.
Yeah, that's the list I heard from Matthias. Yeah.
That's staggering. And the year before that, there was probably less than 10. So if you want to understand what people are doing in this space, like go talk to them. Like they're the leaders' peers, and you don't even have to take my word for it. Listen to all the stories. J&J is going to be on stage. Coke's going to be on stage. BMS, Bristol Myers Squibb, is going to be on stage. Like there are people going to be on stage talking about their success in these realms. Now, is it all of the stuff I'm talking about and this, like the Google map for no, like that stuff is not here today. But like they're real people doing real things. And by the way, in my writing, in both my books, I do case studies of people having success at this. And I think it's important to learn from the people that are doing this. And by the way, people, like, it's not easy. There's no magic button. And like digital is hard. AI is even harder, and it's a slog, and we learn by making mistakes. So every leader that you see up on that stage has made lots and lots and lots of mistakes, and that's part of the learning process.
Yeah, and I'll just re-emphasize two things that you said. One, we will both be in DPW, so if you want to discuss more and hear more, then find us there. And I personally read the two first books already, but not the latest one yet. And I found the first two to be absolutely eye-opening, mostly in those case studies that you mentioned, right? Those supporting evidence that you just brings life to a lot of these higher level topics that we've discussed today. So absolutely highly recommend. I'm sure the latest one is the greatest, and I on the flight to Amsterdam. That's my plan. I'll put a dent in it then.
Well, it's not, it hasn't been released. It actually technically releases at DPW, so you can read it on the way back.
On the way back. On the way back. I love it. Perfect. So hopefully that gets into how do we convince leadership, and I think these are two key things, because to me, one of the aspects that we didn't get to yet is culture. And this point of, these leaders that are pushing against it goes to the core of the organizational culture. Is it a culture that celebrates innovation, that allows people to make mistakes? Because as you mentioned, it will involve, there will be mistakes. There will be things that we try to do that are not successful. So organization's culture needs to shift to embrace that, to accept that. Similarly to what we've seen in a lot of other sub-functions in an organization.
Yeah, but let me pick on the thread. J&J is doing this. They're one of the biggest enterprises in the world, or they're in that discussion. Maybe not the biggest, but they're huge, and their legacy. If they can do it, what's your excuse? And I'm being deliberately provocative there, but like they can do it. And look at, I can't remember all the other folks that'll be on stage or that I hear talking all the time. Like they do British Telecom, another one. Like British Telecom is like, they're not known for being cutting edge, and yet what they're doing in their procurement with BT sourced is leading the way. And there's others. So I don't care how old, how legacy, how risk averse, how whatever. I mean, you're seeing it in highly regulated industries like pharma. Like a lot of the pharma companies are leading the way on this, and they're highly regulated. The regulators are peering over their shoulders every 5 minutes. So like it can be done. This is not like you got to ask us like the organization has to ask itself, is it just trying to avoid doing the work, or is it really serious about it? Because if you're serious about it, you can do it.
I 100% agree. If you're serious about it, you can do it. Anyway, another question from Alan. Okay, I'm on the supplier side. The procurement systems need improvement to support the full complement of users, procurement, hiring managers, vendors, contractors, employees, etc. The tools are really just tools, and implementation needs to also include workflow and process improvement, such as all your favorite points, Elouise. Do you see AI helping that or hindering that? I'll let you take it first.
Um, so I have a really like so I have a whole thing on supplier experience management because I think it's an absolute disaster. Just to give you like insight and why I hate the legacy tools so much. So I was invited to an RFP. Carney was invited to an RFP, and it got assigned to me. I'm not sure why, but it got assigned to me. So I log in. The first thing I'm presented with is 23 versions of AT Carney. So there's AT Carney, there's AT Carney, whatever's registered in entities registered in the UK and Middle East, 23 different Carneys. So I'm supposed to figure this out. I have no idea what Carney I'm supposed to do, and what happens if I click the wrong one. Then what happens? Like I have no idea. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And so going back to our map to the national park, going back to our discussion about process orchestration, we have to get these tools applied to the supplier side, because to me, I actually would rather solve for the supplier more so than I don't really care about buyers and requisitioners and procurement people. I care about the suppliers because most enterprises have at least 10, if not 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 suppliers. That's the problem. That's the risk. That's the opportunity. So we need vastly better systems and experiences, and there's no reason not to put Gen AI process orchestration into that. And you could even do it first because you can de-risk it and work with your tail of tail suppliers or whatever, and you can start to do that. So I think that's as relevant as anything else.
I love that. There's a follow-up from Andrew that I think is really interesting. He's asking about the leaders that they might not, and sorry if you hear a lot of drilling, hopefully it's not as bad through the Zoom filtering of sound. But what Andrew is saying is that these leaders might not be necessarily weak, but very conservative and risk averse, which I think is really what we were alluding to. And he's asking if AI still produces a lot of errors, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Like I would say it produces more errors than not. But
Yes.
but you want to be the one that's catching those errors and learning, because you got to start the journey now. We're late to the journey. And because if you wait 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for it to be baked and fully done, then you'll have missed the key learnings. It's in the fail. I said earlier, you learn by failing. That's what a video game is all about. You fail, you get knocked down, you
Yeah.
get back up, and you restart over and over and over again. And there's no reason we shouldn't be doing that. And in fact, I mean, I'm not saying change your production systems today, but just back to the supplier example, why couldn't you work with if you have 100,000 suppliers, why can't you work with 500 suppliers and pilot some of these things we're talking about? Even if the AI is wrong, those 500 suppliers will appreciate the opportunity that you're trying to make their lives better. And maybe you don't do Gen AI, maybe you do some other use case. That's okay. But do it, because you can't, if you wait, it'll be way too late and you'll be too far behind.
I agree. And I'll add two things. The way I like to think about AI and automation and orchestration in general is it's sort of like you're standing at the edge of this big, big canyon. And you know that what you need to do is get to the other side. But if you just run and try to jump, you're probably going to fall down, right? The chances you hit the other side. But if you think of it as a bridge that you just take a step at a time, right? And you build this bridge, and then slowly you get to the other side of it. And that means that when you start adopting AI, right, maybe it's not just Gen AI, which is the newest and latest, you combine it with some factual AI that's been around for a while, that's been given recommendations, right? There are technologies that are more mature, more baked. Don't try to solve it on your own. Gen AI is an expertise, right? Understanding it, we can call it prompt engineering, understanding how it works, what are the strengths and weaknesses. That's an entire expertise that people go to school for a long time, or read some LinkedIn tips. That's an option too. But I mean, it takes time. So take advantage of systems that already learned some of the mistakes so that you don't have to, learn all of them, right? Take from others' experience, and then don't view it as an all or nothing. You can start with some lower risk, and I think the way you think about it from a process orchestration perspective, you know what, if the process is, a little bit there or a little bit there, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe don't let it automatically pick your suppliers on day one, right? Or maybe it's steps, right? You start by recommendations that someone looks at, right? Pick a solution that helps people understand the reasoning behind the decision making, right? Help it should communicate so that you understand it, so that you learn to trust it, so that at some point in the future, when you've already tweaked it, when you've learned all of these mistakes, then you can automate. But I don't view it as, a single step, but multiple baby steps that would get you there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think one last question from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, 5 years from now, that is Sean's follow-up. 5 years from now, when we look back on what we believe about AI now and how we are running towards the panacea of solving in that context, what will we say we believe? Oh, sorry, it jumped for me. Okay, what will we say we believed was gospel? Or will we make the same mistake? How do we avoid that recurring theme? Maybe always being in tune with the customer experience is how you stay ahead of the curve and don't fall behind to the next companies.
So I've run towards a lot of panaceas in my career, which is why I'm skeptical and cynical. And I'm not even jumping on the Gen AI hype bandwagon, even though it's in the title of this session and I've talked about it a lot. Ultimately, and I think you get to it at the last bit of the question, is what are we solving for? We're solving for a good customer experience, because procurement's role in the world is to use supply and demand power to orchestrate good, successful business outcomes, usually cost savings, but also increasingly third-party risk, ESG, and so on and so forth. So that's our remit, and we always have to stick to that. Now, whether you use AI, Gen AI, no AI, you could even use analog. And interestingly, in my new book, I asked the question of when I talk about analog systems. Somebody showed me a category management fold out piece of paper and the other day that I thought was actually really brilliant. And I'm going to highlight that. I tell you the name of the company it showed me. I can't remember, but I'm still stuck by this very, very paper tactile thing, because I actually think it helps reinforce the ideas and concepts. And so I don't think it's always about it's whatever tool gets it done. And so I push it back against the all this hype, because I hate the hype. And that's why I even started the session by saying that I added Gen AI to my spider map under duress and begrudgingly, because I do think there's too much hype, and I don't expect Gen AI to be the be all end all. And I think you framed it out a few minutes ago, like there's going to be all these components that we bring together, and that's part of the journey. But that's also why we need to be on this journey now. Now, the pivot to this, and I see this Q&A on getting IT to prioritize procurement. This is another one that's really a thorn in my side. Remember, procurement creates value across the board. Remember, our job is to orchestrate supply and demand power. Well, guess what? That creates value, that whether it's cost savings, hard dollar cost savings, or risk avoidance or ESG driving towards goals. So if IT wants a win, they should work with procurement to do this. And so often IT has been a blocker, but increasingly we're getting past that now. So and in my current book, the one that's out, I lay out this case very clearly. Now in my new book, sidebar, I come completely after CIOs for being weak and not pursuing this agenda. So you can choose it either way you want.
I love that. Can't wait to read that one. Okay, we're getting close to time. So I really do appreciate, before we wrap, one last question for you. Who else should we be talking to on our webinar series? Interesting people in this space where we can have a conversation as engaging, as interesting as this one.
Yeah, I think, well, you certainly could go to DPW and find 1,000 people. So there's a few people. I'll try to keep the list. So Sheila Gulati, who's one of the co-founders of Tola Capital, I'm a big fan of hers, and I bring her in to talk to a lot of my clients because she's the one investing in ProcureTech and other solutions. There are Jack Freeman at PeakSpan's another one that, like, we spent a lot of the lockdown during the pandemic talking about ProcureTech as PeakSpan was moving into this space significantly. Practitioners, certainly Vanya Petrovic at Coca-Cola European Bottlers. I forget the exact. It's CCEP, but she's doing some really interesting things, and she was just speaking at a conference this week. But and certainly you could go down the list of everybody speaking at DPW, and those are the go-tos. And then I give a shout out to Cyril, who's the CPO or the CEO at BT Source, Sabi Rosales at Vodafone. He'll also be at DPW. I'm a big fan of their work. And then I feel like I'm missing somebody, but anyway, that's a really good list to start with. Oh, Sachi at BMS as another one.
Very exciting. So hopefully we can bring some more of these conversations here for you on the Opstream webinar series. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please follow us on LinkedIn to get more snippets and exciting webinars like this one. And hopefully we'll see you at DPW.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely. And be sure to follow me as well.
Yes. Thank you, Elouise. Always a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.